Okay. Hi, Douglas. How are you?
Hello, Douglas. Great name.
Yes, great name. And it's not as common of a name as you would think. I mean, when you hear somebody's name Douglas, you're like, oh, okay, I've heard that name before, like David and John and James. But there aren't a lot of Douglases. At least, I think there's more in Canada, though. Are you in Canada?
Yeah, but I spent most of my career in Europe, and actually, I worked with a guy called Michael, and we were kind of twins. They used to call us Michael Douglas, so that kind of worked.
Well, I see Douglas as a last name a lot, and sometimes with two S's, and
A lot of people misspell the second S. Yes, I see that a lot.
yeah, you get two S's. But anyways, nice to have a fellow Douglas on the show, and I think you're about maybe the third one out of 620 shows. So
Okay, that
welcome.
means we're rare.
Yeah, we are very much so. Anyways, let's move on. So I was reading through your bio, and I'm just going to read this: journalism, filmmaking, podcasting, scientific institute management, executive training, technology research, award-winning health building design, and global digital standards for health products. I'm going to guess that you're kind of a serial entrepreneur. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, that is correct. But the serial entrepreneurialism has a thread running through it, Douglas, and that thread is health in almost everything that I've done for the past 30 years.
I did want to touch quickly on the most watched TV network in the Ukraine. What did you do? Tell us a little about that. That sounds interesting.
Well, actually, that's a good example of the thread that I'm talking about because we originally started with a project called the Children of Chernobyl, which brought doctors from around the world into Ukraine to train Ukrainian doctors on general health care for children because everyone else was sending in outdated drugs, equipment that no one could use, and pulling kids out for 2 weeks and then thrusting them back home again, none of which was working and billions were wasted. What we did was we brought the doctors in and they had to sit there, understand the Ukrainian situation, and work with Ukrainian doctors. So, oddly enough, out of that, we realized that one of the needs was for general health care and general health education. And that started me thinking, because of my journalism background, that maybe we should do something on television. And at the time, a guy by the name of Peter Gerway, who, for people who are old enough, might remember, started the US concerts and also did the first music concert in the former Soviet Union and had started his own television station in St. Petersburg. We got together and he said, well, why do a program? Why don't we start a television network? And there was actually no commercial television network in Ukraine at the time. It was only the state TV. And so that's what we did. We did a deal with the Ministry of Communications of Ukraine. We used their emergency backup system that they didn't need anymore because there was no nuclear war threat. And we used programming from Canada, the United States, and Europe, which started mostly with environmental and health programming. That turned into ICTV. I named the network ICTV, and in Cyrillic, it works pretty well. So ICTV was started in the 1990s. It was way ahead. It was the world's first instant national television network because we had 27 broadcast nodes from the Ministry of Communications. And so it was really, for me, it was the health and environment driver that got the whole thing going. It has since blossomed, and it is now today one of the most watched television networks in Ukraine. Of course, it's mostly entertainment and news programming. But having said that, we taught a lot of people how to work properly, because in those days, the old adage in the Soviet Union was they pretend to pay us and we pretend to work. Well, we changed all that. And so it changes people's mindset as well. And it was a fantastic and extraordinarily difficult thing to do, but that's how it came to be.
Was your network the start of Zelensky's comedy routine career?
That's a good question, actually. You know something? I have to confess, I haven't looked at that. I can't remember if it actually played on our network first, but I think actually it was a production that was then sold to the networks. So I don't think I can claim credit for that one.
Okay. You've also written some books. How many books do you have published at this point?
Well, it depends on what you call a book. Somewhere between 5 and 7, but 3 of them are kind of official, or 4 are kind of official books that are on Amazon and available in most bookstores. The first one was actually called Our Molecular Future, which was about how the convergence of nanotechnology, robotics, and artificial intelligence is changing our world. And that was 20 years ago, and it's just becoming current today with what's happening with AI. And most of what was predicted in the book is actually coming to pass today. From there, we figured that one of the most beneficial things we could do with high technology was to go at one of the most prevalent medical conditions on the planet and see if it could be fixed. And that was hardening of the arteries, which is the most widespread condition on Earth. And that led to the book called The Calcium Bomb, which also led to a 1-hour documentary that played across Europe on the Arte channel. And from that, we identified the problems associated with getting rid of this stuff, which is the toughest stuff to get rid of in the whole body. And I became involved in several startups that were working on that. A lot of money was spent. There were a lot of failures along the way. But we were able in those years to chronicle the stories of the researchers, the doctors, and the patients who were actually succeeding in reversing the damage that was done by this condition. And that, along with several new breakthroughs, led to the current book, which is Discovering the Nature of Longevity, Restoring the Heart and Body by Targeting Hidden Stress. So it was a string that ran through all of those books. Oddly enough, I've also published a booklet that takes a very different approach to this and is probably one of the most important, and that is, how can we use the places where we live and work to actually protect ourselves from these chronic conditions? And that's called Creating Buildings with Positive Impacts. And it is free. And if you just Google that, it will come up. And it's important because we spend 85% of our lives in buildings. And a lot of those buildings today concentrate the hidden stresses that I talk about in the book. A healthy building does the opposite. It helps you to prevent those stresses. So that's why this is not a medical story. This is an empowerment story about how people can protect themselves from and effectively treat and reverse the damage that is done by these conditions that start from the day that we're born.
Okay, you were talking about healthy buildings and unhealthy buildings. Now, I know that in the past we've had asbestos, which is probably pretty much gone at this point. Lead paint was another one that was prevalent in the past. What are some of the other things that are current that would constitute an unhealthy building?
Well, Douglas, oddly enough, they're still there. A lot of these buildings still have those two things that you talked about. But on top of that, we've been literally pouring hundreds of thousands of different chemicals into our buildings. And at the same time, we've been sealing them up to be energy efficient. Well, sealing a building that is full of chemicals that are being emitted and particles that are being worn off from all the furniture, because it's in textiles, in all the wall coverings and everything else, leads to what? It leads to a concentration, and it leads to indoor air quality that is 8 times worse than outdoor air quality. Now, one of the main components of that is what I talk about in the book, and that is toxic metals. These are the same metals that go into all of our electronics. For example, lead is still very much around. It's still being used in products. Cadmium, chromium, gadolinium. There's a whole laundry list of these metals, and they're used in everything from pumps to electronics to computers to cell phones. And they were used for a long time in leaded gasoline. So the legacy of that is with us as well. This is one of the main hidden stresses. And the reason that it's important, Douglas, and this is what I focus on in the book, is because recently clinical trials have been done that show when you get rid of these metals from the body, people get better. And the American Heart Association just announced that these same metals are a new measurable heart disease risk. So a healthy building will keep those metals away from you. That's what I spent the last 30 years doing. It was training people in how to develop healthy products and healthy buildings that keep these hidden stresses away from people.
Okay, you had a couple of photographs. Can you hold those up and tell us quickly about what that is?
Oh yeah, this is fun. Before I do that, I'm just going to show people something. It's something you can also do if you're just listening. If you take the back of your hand and you put the skin between the thumb and the forefinger, you hold it up for about 3 seconds and you let it go. If you're an older guy like me, it'll go down slowly. If you're a younger person, it'll snap right back. Now, most people are told, oh, that's collagen. Collagen makes your skin flexible. Wrong. I know you hear this from all the cosmetics companies. They're getting better at it. But the reason they never talked about what the real stuff is because they could never fix it until recently. And I'll get to that in a moment. That is the elastic fiber in your skin. And guess what? It's in your lungs. It's in your organs. It's in your sex organs. You can't have sex without it. So it's all over your body, and as I say, it drives every breath you take and every step you make. So every time we move, this stuff is controlling what we move. Now, elastin fiber is damaged by these hidden stresses. It cuts off little chinks of them all the time, starting from the day that you're born. And the big problem happens after you're 30, because no one knows why, but your body stops assembling this elastin fiber. So as it degrades, it creates this inflammatory response, chronic inflammation that so many people have heard about. And that inflammation is responsible for triggering things like heart disease. Now, just taking the image here, I hope you can see it, but for those of people who can't, on the right-hand side, I'm showing elastin fiber in a 6-year-old, and it's nice and smooth, and it's all woven together between all that great collagen that people tell you about. On the left-hand side, the gnarly, ratty stuff is elastin in a 96-year-old, and you can see what the mess it is. That is us aging. So the stresses that I talk about, these hidden stresses in the book, are attacking this elastin fiber and doing exactly this to it. The great news is that there have been several discoveries in the past few years about how to fix it. And I actually am a co-founder of one of the companies, Elastin Therapeutics, that has a technology, it's not the only one, to actually restore this elastin fiber. It's never been done before. And one of our sister companies actually is in clinical trial right now. They announced results of their first clinical study just a few weeks ago, and they announced that aneurysms that affect 7 million people in the United States alone now can be prevented from bursting because this elastic fiber that's in your arteries can be repaired. When that fiber gets weakened, that is when aneurysms start. And by the way, that's when hardening of the arteries start, and that's when hypertension starts. So anyone who's listening to this who has hypertension, blocked stents, blocked arteries, any of those conditions and aneurysms, this is for you, because now there's really something that everybody can do about it. And Douglas, just one thing I'm going to add, this starts from birth and it affects every single one of us. None of us are immune from these stresses. They're inside all of us. And so now, that's why I say the book is about empowerment. It's not about medicine. There's something that we can all do to take action to get rid of this stuff.
Okay, great. On that, we're going to have to wind this down. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you so much for coming on. Can you give out your website, please?
Sure. The website is www.natureoflongevity.com, all one word, natureoflongevity.com. And also, if you Google my name and Discovering Longevity, it will come up immediately.
Okay, great. Well, Douglas, thank you for coming on the show. I know we didn't touch on too much of this in detail, but I think we gave people an overview, and pick up the book if you want more information. Thank you again for coming on the show.
Thanks, Douglas, and you've done a great service today. I appreciate the show taking this on.